Hey, everybody, welcome to our March call of brands and outliers. Really excited to dig into it today, so I'll hand it over to the team.
Great. The first insight is a big one we're going to talk about. All of our fundamental institutions are in the exploration phase at one time. So, Holly, if you just jump to the next slide, I just want to overview what that means exactly. This is our culture and market change framework. So, obviously, entrenchment's really easy to understand. Things are stable, things are fixed. Then things can move into tension where we have unsettled feelings and we're not quite sure what to do about them. Players need to come in, change, create something new. That brings us to the exploration phase, which is where we are now with a lot of our major social institutions. It's very rare. There aren't many moments in history where you have this many of our fundamental core institutions like the media, family, democracy, education, changing all at once and trying to find alternatives at the same time. So that's really what we're going to be talking about. A lot of the signals in this section really just show this exploration that's really just beginning, so that ideally we can move into what comes next, the transformation phase. So then the cycle will repeat itself again. So it's an exciting section. Friend of the pod, Jonathan Haidt, has really been talking about the Supreme Court hearings with tech CEOs lately. It's all about content moderation, and he's got a new book coming out that we may have talked about in previous episodes of Outliers, The Anxious Generation. And his argument is that, yeah, it's great that we're talking about content moderation on social media. But even if we could remove 95% of the harmful content, we still wouldn't solve the problem, because the problem is phone-based childhood itself, just what it does to teen mental health. And he cites Marshall McLuhan. Doing the research this month, Marshall McLuhan came up a lot. I feel like, just with many different sources, actually. It's just like, I feel like, his thinking is having a moment again. The medium is the message, right? With like, it's the medium, it's the phone-based childhood that fundamentally changes things. And so, it was just interesting to see McLuhan come up a lot. Another thing this month that, is making the rounds in our community and on the internet is Ted Gioa is a cultural commentator, and he had a piece come out on the rise of dopamine culture. It's a pretty interesting breakdown. You can see what he does here. Takes a given area of culture and shows how what used to be slow traditional culture that moved into fast modern culture and ultimately dopamine culture. And I think we can all feel this, like, this idea of dopamine culture isn't necessarily new, but what Guillaume was trying to do was to draw our attention to just how like deeply embedded it's become. It's become like the scale of it is on another degree right now. And I think with the Supreme Court hearings that, we talked about just a second ago, really just shows like the saturation too. There's been a consciousness raising moment right now with all of this stuff. Like, social scientists have been trying to figure out for 20 years, like, what happened, and like the findings are now just like, I feel like the picture is now settled. Like, we've got like a very clear understanding of cause and effect in a way that we didn't. And if you jump to the next slide, this is his take on how culture has changed and how it kind of operates now with a series of like bigger fish eating smaller fish. So, you can take art, like original artwork that got cannibalized by entertainment, which, like with the first generation of social media, got cannibalized by distraction. Like, I need to keep you engaged. And ultimately, like, the biggest fish is like addiction that's driving this. And like this piece by Gil really details how exactly this addiction is fueling everything. What's interesting about it to me is that the regulatory framework just can't keep up, right? Like, in the past, you had cigarettes and alcohol and gambling. We know these things are addictive. We're going to regulate them heavily, sequester them, put them over in this corner of society. And there's a lot of strict rules and norms around consumption. We got ahead of it. But there are now so many other addictive things, and the tech is really rapidly advancing that, like, a lot of it doesn't, the clothing that these platforms wear, it's like, it's not as obvious that like addiction is the business model. So, it's just an interesting piece by Gioa here for sure.
What this makes me think about is, we talk about smartphones and social media and the consequences of that here. Like, I really wonder about AI driven entertainment, AI driven engagement and experiences. Like, that's moving at such a clip right now that, like, yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder if you need like a different legislative operating system almost. Like I wonder, like I know Sweden has some interesting policy structures. Like it'd be fascinating to watch what governments do and to see if anyone can come up with a different altogether approach. Like I think that the fundamental difference between US and European law is that in the US things are legal until proven unsafe, versus in Europe things are often in some like cosmetic industries and food illegal until proven safe. So there's a different kind of default benchmark. I really, really wonder how it will manifest, and I think that's the place to look at, it's Europe, and look at their legal approach to these technologies as things ramp up in speed dramatically.
Yeah, I just saw something actually doing research for an article. Italy is one of the only countries that has regulated replica AI companions. And so to your point, generally, like they're maybe ahead of the game. But it caused so much, like what was interesting to me about that is that how much pain it caused their users. And so like that's a whole other legal issue as well. It's like if I become attached to my person in this way, and then the regulatory framework changes and that changes my interaction with the person, I'm not going to be very
Yeah.
happy. And that's what we were seeing
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, if enough people are sufficiently addicted is a heavy word there, but if they're sufficiently, they love their AI friends, then that becomes politically very unpopular to regulate that. So I think I mean, this is fascinating, but it is so interesting that the piece of infrastructure that is so important here is our legal infrastructure, which, at first blush, you wouldn't necessarily think about when you're talking about technology, but it feels like everything is converging on that being the bottleneck, which is just, I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens there.
Which reminds me of like recently, I think like Match.com, like Tinder, Tinder and Hinge, like they got sued over, addictive dating apps. And so, part of it is like more and more people recognizing that these things are actually addictive. I think that's also part of the, sort of the narrative is that like we have to at least at first acknowledge that these things are like really harmful to us. And like this is one example of like, of that kind of like, coming to the surface. But yeah, I think it's going to be a while before these things really kind of sort of change or like go back to being non-addictive, or I'm not sure, but
I think it's also just really messy, and that like, because we've talked before about I think on the last brand watch that we did about how Gen Alpha are much more private in these spaces, right? So like maybe they recede from social media, but like if your tutor or your teacher is an AI, like can you even recede from that if you wanted to? In terms of like just the surface area of technology, it changes in a way where like I don't know if you get the optionality that we think. We just don't know what the optionality is going to look like for kids growing up, let's say in a decade from now with this tech. Maybe they don't use social media, but maybe the replacement is AI, and that's something that's almost inescapable because of how effective it is in a positive way for so many other use cases.
So speaking of legislation, so Florida has passed a bill through the legislature that would essentially ban people who are 16 and younger from socials, so like TikTok, YouTube, that kind of thing. So it would be anybody who is 16 or younger, but then anybody who these platforms perceive to be that age as well. So kind of opening up a can of worms. Different, Supreme Courts in different states have had bills like this, and they pass the House and the Senate of the state, and then they actually get vetoed in the courts. So it'll kind of be interesting to see what happens. This one is one of the most strict bans for younger people, again, for reasons we've talked about of different, how it affects people's mental health. But it went through pretty quickly. So again, just like a comment on that stood out was, it's basically, there's bipartisan support for this kind of initiative.
So this is what is interesting about this is that it's a full-on embrace of AI as AI. Like this company, this organization, the Lincoln Project, says AI is here to stay in campaigns, and we're going to use every tool in the box. That's one of the tools, and they're very fully transparent that this is AI generated. Like I think when people think about AI propaganda in the context of like democratic elections, they think about, disinformation. I'm going to hide the fact. I'm going to try to dupe you. This is like, nope, we're doing this. And like, we're doing this because we deliberately know this is going to push the emotional buttons of Trump. And, I watched this thing and it was just like, I'm yes, you're president. I'm still ashamed of you, for all these things. Like they reanimated the dad talking about how embarrassed he is by his son. It's like, I doubt Trump saw it, or maybe he did. I don't know. But it's just, will we see more of this? Like, this is just like unabashed, and like that's why it was interesting versus like hiding. No, this is unabashed provocation, and yeah, I think a lot of people talk about. I think it's like what 60% of the world's population this year is going to vote democratically. So this is a referendum year on where we stand with democracy, right at the time where like all this stuff is starting to happen. And democracy was built, as we know, in an age of like one to many transmissions of media. The system wasn't perfect, as this blurb says, but it was maybe a little bit better than we have now. So now we're about to find out how democracy is going to stand up to this information ecosystem this year. All right, well, we can't not talk about Sora that got announced since our last Brands and Outliers. This was, to me, an interesting take. Obviously it's going to lead us deeper into the highly visual culture we now inhabit. I'm not so interested in the older question of, it'll make it impossible to trust much of what we see on film. Like, that's a little played out. Like, that's actually not what's interesting, about this. What is interesting that we'll continue to talk about is what OpenAI seems to have achieved technologically is that a very accurate physical model of reality. A lot of speculation on, can they use this then to train robots? Like, does this mean that like suddenly like robotics is going to really, really accelerate? Like, the hidden story there was like, oh my God, wow. They really seem to have figured out how to map physical reality. Like, that's what held self-driving cars back for so long. So this is pretty interesting take.
Yeah, I think that like thinking about all the legal changes and like how we're moving away from social media culturally, it seems, especially like parenting, generationally, we're moving away from it. And then we're moving towards AI. Like, it does feel that like there is a very profound shakeup in the sort of modality of our reality, so to speak, and that like just what we consume, where our attention goes, is probably going to go through a pretty substantial shift, it seems like. I think that like when it's so fundamental, there are so many second, third order consequences that are just almost impossible to predict. But to your point about how we're in exploration mode, it's like, I don't think we know how deep this rabbit hole goes. Like, a lot of things are by necessity, I think, going to have to change because of the scale of disruption.
Last thing I wanted to say that I forgot to mention, the last two sentences, that this is a kind of simulation engine. Various users have even said that Sora lends further credence to the simulation argument. Like, it's I don't know if I buy that, but yeah, this is how you would do it. If you were going to, if we were not in base reality would have started here. That's for sure.
But what is really interesting about these models is the unexpected capabilities that they end up with. Like, like what you're talking about, where like it so happens that like, in generating a video of an ocean, it's actually doing a really good job at like doing fluid dynamics modeling at a relative to the computational demand very efficiently. It's just kind of really weird that we might end up in a future where the AI that drives our self-driving cars, the same AI that sends me tweets and YouTube videos, and I ask it about the weather. Like, it's the same model. Not even, it's not just like the same architecture. It's like, it's the exact same model that can do so many different things. I think that was definitely not on anyone's bingo card, but it turns out that like, in building ridiculously capable AI, like, maybe we just need a few of them to do so many different things. Like, we don't need specialist models like we've had with like every app for different stuff. And I think that that's unintuitive, but fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely want to own that one.
Yeah, it definitely helps.
In response to AI, WorldCoin's it was 190% surge in the value of WorldCoin, which I had to be like, okay, what does that mean? Why? Well, because WorldCoin is pioneering the development of this iris scanning technology to verify that you are an actual human. Or that you are you, that this video is not fake. So like the introduction of Sora caused this company's value to surge. And so that what you're looking at there in the center of the screen, that's how this works. There are these little orbs that scan your iris, and then you get your World ID passport. And so just there's this arms race now of technology to stop fakes.
Could it be used the other way around? That like you can opt in to have your face used as an extra in an AI video, and then you get paid some tiny dividend. I wonder how these things get used in the long run. That'd be an interesting thing if all AI video had to be generated with human faces. And it's like, oh, I recognize that person. It'd just be, yeah, kind of interesting.
Another response, Tyler Perry decided to stop the $800 million planned expansion on his Atlanta studio after he saw, the Sora demos. Like, nope, I'm not gonna waste this $800 million. It says here it was apparently enough to convince him that it was going to, bound to replace a lot of things. So this is a pretty swift, pretty declarative statement from somebody that's huge in Hollywood.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like that development was like everybody was looking forward to that. That was a big deal. That's I can't say it's shocking. I think it's I guess really like astute of him to realize that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it seems shrewd for sure. But it's shrewd and shocking at the same time. Usually things move slow, right? This is such a dramatic thing that happens so fast.
That's exactly it.
We talked about this a little bit internally. That China is going to be the biggest investor in robotics technology because of population trends. They already are. We know that demographically, China is aging and the replacement is not there, and so they're going to be arguably one of the leading implementers of robotics first. Just scanning, you do a lot of scanning and headlines, you do a lot of internet research, and I came across these back to back, and it couldn't help but put them on the same slide to illustrate this fundamental tension that we've been talking about of, do you view the future negatively or do you view the future positively? It is the distinction really right now in culture of that's how we sort, you have people talking about the ethos of the divine age. I'm fascinated by E/ACC, the accelerationist movement. That's who penned the top article there, and also a lot of stats of the growing childless. We see the videos on TikTok that people like to dunk on about the joys of being childless among young people. The antinatalist movement is rising. It's inherently, you could argue, I'm not one of these people, but you could argue that it is an inherently pessimistic view on the future for sure. So this was also, the Vision Pro got introduced before, since our last one. This was an interesting take on it. How consequential will this be? How disruptive will it be? The answer depends on, will this be a device of progression or immersion? So when you think immersion, obviously escapism, entertainment, or progression, this person lists cars, planes, smartphones, social media. These were truly transformative technologies that actually led to productivity and progression, whereas crypto, smartwatches, VR have yet to do this. So which one of these will the Vision Pro be? I just, kind of wanted to ask you. I'm not sure. I hunch progress, but, I guess I don't ultimately know.
If you think about it as a device, devices they have so many different functions. People can spend an entire workday on their phone. They can complete their job on their phone. So as far as the modality of what it is, I think it's going to be many, many, many things. I think it's going to be I do think that the bet of this replacing a lot of other devices is pretty significant. I think what's really interesting is not so much what the device looks like now, but we are maybe a couple of generations away with this technology to having it be as inobtrusive as glasses. Imagine if you had your glasses and there was just a small wire that trailed down into your pocket where there was a phone-sized device that did all the compute. If you imagine a device like that, where you could really wear it seamlessly in public, I think it's kind of funny because it blends the real and the digital, but I think in a way it also blends your work life with your personal life. It blends all of these things. Just I think it's the symbol of kind of everything kind of blending together in a way, and so it's all of the above. But again, it's to that point of it's going to disrupt it's going to disrupt how a lot of things get done, right? It's going to disrupt how we consume information, because maybe that will change from social media. Maybe it'll be that me and someone else can watch the same feed at the same time together, and it makes it inherently social. I think one of the interesting points of critique about Apple versus Meta's approach to VR is Meta went with a deeply social experience, and the Vision Pro is a deeply individual experience. There's almost no social features. And so that's kind of an interesting divide, because it does seem that so far the killer use case is the social element. Like, I literally play a game of mini golf with my siblings in Europe in VR. Like, that's one of the ways that we hang out. So, it's like late at night for me, early morning for them. We'll play a round of golf and just catch up about life. And so I think in a social sense, it's really powerful. And that's what I'm really curious about, do we imagine a world where you're sat on a public bench talking to someone else who's sat on a different public bench somewhere else in the world? Like, it just, again, it's that blurring of reality where, they can see each other now instead of just, they're holding the phone to their ear. So blurring is, I guess, the operative word I would use here.
Yeah, I saw a very interesting Twitter thread, like philosophical question. If you could, like in VR, in the Vision Pro, if you could look at the Grand Canyon and, feel the wind and hear the birds and basically have a almost complete fidelity experience of the Grand Canyon, like, would you still want to go? Like, do you still need to go? And so the social component of, like, could you go on vacation, with people? Like, can you, like, with your family across the ocean, could you see the same thing, share the same experience of a place? And it's almost like you're taking a vacation together. And it's an interesting thought. It's like, it seems like, well, duh, yeah, that's for sure going to come.
Well, okay, well, I want to take that one step further, because I think you're touching on something. It was like, what if you could make that experience, quote unquote, better, right? Which is, basically what you're describing is a really lightweight video game of a Grand Canyon thing. If you took that further and said, hey, let's create it's just like, are we going to hang out in virtual environments? And it's kind of this question of, like, if you can simulate the physical world, you can simulate a more interesting world than the physical world. And so the question is does it become more compelling to hang out in digital space socially or in physical space socially? Like, sure, I can't hug you or interact with you physically, but, hey, we can go shoot a bunch of aliens and then go hang out at a crazy, virtual bar afterwards with, whatever kind of experience you want to imagine. And so, it's just, it does raise a really interesting question of, like, choosing reality or choosing virtual reality is, like, an important choice. And, like, I don't know, like, if we're going to net out on a different answer eventually.
I have a random thought on that. I wonder if in the future, the way you're raised will kind of be a determining factor for, like, how much time you can tolerate spending in virtual environments. Because I would imagine if you're like us and you're not raised in virtual environments, you can only tolerate so much. But if you're raised in them, like that, you're just kind of, I don't know if the word is, like, habituated, but, like, you know how to experience them without it, like, fatiguing you or whatever. I wonder if that might be the determining factor.
Well, I want to mention that the primary way in which kids socialize today is already in video games. So I think to your point, I think we've already crossed the Rubicon there. Like,
you don't think there's a line between, like, a screen in front of you versus an immersive?
Well, I mean,
screen?
obviously there's a difference, but I'm just saying, as far as modality, we've already accepted. We've embraced digital, and a lot of that is just logistics. Like, I guess certainly in America, like, just the physical infrastructure, the access to parks, the lack of walkable spaces, like, by necessity, a lot of people, kids are growing up with, digital being the primary place to socialize, just because of access and convenience. And so,
I've heard that argument a lot, but something, I don't have any, like, stats for this, but something makes me feel like there is a line between looking at screens versus living in a simulated environment. And I think that could be a thing of, like, whether you were exposed to it a lot when you were younger.
I think what's just surprising to me, there's a couple people I follow who go quite deep into reviewing, like, different virtual experiences and virtual phenomena, and, like, it seems that the people, like, once you start getting into it, you get really into it. You get sucked into it. You want full body motion capture. You buy all the gear. Like, it's a very, very expensive hobby. That's one way to look at it. If you just keep wanting more and more and more, you want more realism. So I think that there is this kind of pursuit, and it goes as far, I think the term is phantom touch, when someone touches you in VR and your brain essentially, it makes you almost feel it. Right? It gives you a sense of, like, proprioception, right? That you know where the rest of your body is in digital space, and your brain's trying to fill that touch in. I think if you spend enough time there, and some people spend a remarkable amount of time in VR. So I think that the challenge is, it is incredibly immersive, and it can be. And so that I guess, coming back to that point of addiction, like, is it just gonna be addicting to be in these virtual environments that can do things like, I can have all the superpowers I wished I had as a kid in these spaces. I can just go and fly, right? Like, it just, I don't know, but that's kind of my point about like, is this the post-social media thing? Let's say social media becomes banned, and now I'm flying around with my friends in virtual environments. Like, is that the replacement? I have no idea. I'm just throwing ideas out here, but I think that that's a legitimate question to be asking.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. The research I'm doing right now is exploring that exact question. So, like, if I find anything, I'll let you know.
Well, we'll find out eventually.
The family and relationships are in flux as well. This is a recent episode of the Ezra Klein podcast. I've really loved the framing of this question. What relationships would you want if you believed that they were possible? Like, just asking people, like, what relationships would you love to have? Raising a child with your best friend, sharing a home with a married couple. Questions like that. Like, I just hadn't seen a framing of this question like that. I highly recommend people listen to this episode as well. It's a really great book that, they're discussing. So yeah, just to show that obviously, family, friends, relationships are changing as well. This was awesome. AI, this child wore this headset from the age of 6 months through to 2 years. So it had 18 months of data, and there was a lot of efficacy. The AI was able to learn alongside the child. So for me, it raised the super interesting implication of, if this becomes a practice, or some people do this, can your AI version of you, can it grow and learn exactly alongside of you throughout your life? Because it's trained on your experience. It has the same set of experiences that you have. So we all know that we're going to copy ourselves digitally, but there's actually now zero distance between you and your AI when it is trained on your life. And that was just like, like the implications of that seem enormous.
That's the whole Star Trek thing, right? Where when you teleport in Star Trek, technically it kills you in one place and makes a clone of you in the other. And so no one else can tell the difference, but philosophically you died. And so, it's kind of, I mean, it's a legitimate, again, these are the kind of like, what's fascinating is that I think to understand and discuss AI more and more, you really kind of have to be well versed in philosophy because it puts you there.
Right, because we're all hanging out in virtual spaces like we were just discussing. There's no reason your AI couldn't keep doing that in your stead if you were actually dead. And the people that you're hanging out with, would they know the difference? Like, yeah, who knows?
Well, I think that the other way of looking at this is you don't have to wait to die for it to do that on your behalf. What if, for example, you sent your AI copy of you to a mixer and it could find some great friends for you that it would know that would be great, like really good connections for you? Or, take it a step further. What if you could make an AI clone of yourself that went to work? So now you don't have to participate in capitalism anymore. Like those are that's the philosophical question of.
That's kind of the question that was broached by that show, Severance, which hasn't come back yet. That was that's one of those shows where like, it's too bad, you watched it at a very specific time during COVID and lockdown. And I don't know if we can ever get back there again, if a new season comes back. I have a question. Like, okay, I feel like so much of philosophy, like the golden age of philosophy was in the past. And now we're calling on it so much now to understand our future. Is there like a resurgence in philosophy today? Are there famous philosophers today? Is anybody leading a new philosophical like wave? Zach, I'm looking at you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know like Ryan Holiday and his Stoicism empire is doing pretty well. And there's definitely seems to be.
That's kind of pop psychology. And also he's drawing on the Stoics. I don't know that he's written too much like original.
No, it's not.
Stuff.
It's mostly, articulating on that. And, like in a contemporary way, he's not building a new philosophy. He's just kind of bringing the school of Stoicism forward. But to your point of new philosophy, I don't know. I mean, I think that like.
See, this is a weird tension that makes me uncomfortable because we're going back to such old philosophical thinking to understand and make rules for a future that we don't have like frameworks for. It's kind of like you could argue like, why are we still using religion to define morality in a future that looks so different than before? For humanity, that's not even the same. I'm not saying there's something wrong with going back to philosophy, but like you should question how old your tools are And like we're going like further and further
Well, I think
back.
it's kind of what's interesting is that this is really the breaking point for a lot of basically this is the ultimate stress test of a philosophical framework. Like let's take moral philosophy of like, we had the trolley problem for a long time. Hey, now we have the trolley problem, but it's in 1,000 different cases and it's actually being used in real life right now and there are actual lives on the line. Like we have 1,000 real trolley problems to solve. And that's I think what's so interesting about this is like, we're literally programming self-driving cars that are going to be in that situation, and whether explicitly programmed or implicitly, the outcome is designed. Like we have to now code that, because what the difference is that we could afford to be reactive with our technology, but now we literally have to program the outcome proactively, because AI has a sense of agency. It operates outside the bounds. So if you're an airline that has a chatbot, like you have to think about how that's going to behave ahead of time. So anyway, I think that like this is maybe this will become the golden age of moral philosophy. We just don't know it yet.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're also kind of arguing though is that like true philosophy is so like it's such a base truth that like time doesn't matter for it. I think that's what you were kind of saying.
This is some information about artists trying to poison AI. It's like, seems like, what is this, the new punk, the new piracy? Like let me poison the training so you can't get me, you can't steal my work. It's just, interesting, like it speaks to exploration intention and, the unsettled nature of, again, the legal framework.
I think just to note on this, what's so significant about poisoning is that when you poison a model, you can never untrain it. So you have to retrain a model, and that can be remarkably expensive to do. So if you can do it with image and you can do it with text. So you can do, and it's very subtle. Like you put a bunch of images to a human that look fine, and then it no longer is able to produce usable imagery for anything. And you have to retrain it from scratch. So that's what's crazy about this. This is a surprisingly powerful tech, and it will definitely have significant economic impacts in the future.
Peter Thiel, as we know, he started this program way back in 2010, where he, offered to pay students $100K to drop out of school to start companies and nonprofits. And, back then he was met with obviously like a lot of criticism, but today, as we know, like with, higher education being less and less attractive to younger folks, and the application pool for his program has just become much more popular than ever. Some people who come out of this are like the co-founder of Ethereum, someone like there's Laura Demi who's a key figure in aging and longevity, another person who runs self-driving tech, and the co-founder of Upstart. So like a lot of big people have come out of this program. And, when you think about more and more people who are, rethinking the value of college, and more investors are actually willing to back more startups launched by young people who don't have college degrees, it just really changes the way you think about, especially for people who want to go into entrepreneurship, like, do I even need to go to school at all? And Thiel in this article talks about how there's like really no point in trying to reform this institution and this system, which ultimately means that, you have to create a new one. And we've seen this coming for a while, but again, it's just another signal that tells us that, the currents are changing, and that our, institutions are evolving, and education also, again, and being in the exploration phase of sort of this cycle.
Yeah, my bold prediction is that there will be no college in 18 years. We'll see.
Yeah, you and Jean-Louis.
I know there'll be none. That's a bold prediction.
Are you willing to gamble your kid's future on it though? Because I'm not letting us do that. Like,
yes,
we're still
I am
planning for college. So you're not gonna save for college, and like you're not gonna like prepare
it's an open
your
argument.
kid for
We'll
college.
see.
Like you're betting on this.
I obviously prepare. We'll read and react, I guess. Like I mentioned to you, we'll start what I'm calling like positioning is everything, a life fund. And so like maybe he'll start a business with that, or like do something, or but like my bet is it's not going to be used for college. Like that's what. Yeah.
I think that's the way Jean-Louis sees it too. Like he's like, when we have conversations with the kids, it's never about like education. It's about like, let's think about the first business you want to start, and like, how are we going to do it? Like, it's just like, it's very post.
Well, I think you got to entertain the counterfactual. If the world's going to change that much, it's a legitimate question of just that, like, you can challenge those assumptions.
I think we will have like the IBAs and like this like flagship state university, maybe. But even then, those flagship universities will probably specialize in something like very specific industry is my prediction. But
I think the thing to note is that, like, you know, Harvard, for example, like, how big is their endowment fund? It's absurd. They're an unfathomably big fund, so they're certainly not going to run out of money. It's just maybe they'll actually admit that they're actually a hedge fund. So that'll be the new Ivy League hedge funds, and it's a whole different thing. So who knows?
Speaking of academia, so one of, obviously one of like these facts or narratives we have, particularly in like American culture, is that income inequality is growing, right? And like, political campaigns have been run off of it. We've kind of like operated under these like assumptions. But so the original authors of this study who actually, found that income inequality has been growing since the 1960s, there was actually a study published last September, and that might actually not be true. Income inequality might actually be like staying the same, plateauing, and it essentially boils down to the methodology. So some of the authors, like the previous study, they treated government spending differently. So how they allocated educational spending, they allocated that to poor people typically benefit from more education spending, so they allocated that as income, versus newer parties essentially like didn't allocate that information or allocate those funds. And then it also has to do with how these two different studies treated unreported income, so essentially income that's in tax shelters. And the previous study said, people who probably are hiding money in tax shelters are reporting close to the income they already have, versus this other study says, no, it's probably way underreported. So just, a big fact we have in American culture of that there is high income inequality, which, is a mythology and like helps certain narratives politically. But it's interesting that actually might not be true.
All right, next. So this one's about how culture is like expanding. The cultural universe is expanding, and that creates a lot of space and a lot of confusion. And like what we need are new gravitational centers to cluster around in culture. So if you're a baker, the metaphor I love is like you've got a raisin bread dough, and you put it in the oven, and as it bakes, like the raisins expand. So all the space in between is like what's happening to culture. And like we need to cluster around the raisins, which have like, a lot of meaning. And like a lot of the signals here are, they're either showing spread or they're showing gravity. This one shows spread. Teen subcultures are fading. This author is talking about how it's all just aesthetics now. None of these subcultures, like the subculture in the days of yore, they had a whole lot of cultural meaning. You could make an identity around it. It had style in addition to, aesthetics. And now it's all just visual representation, quick churn, without a lot of substance, without a lot of meaning. So the author here is arguing, well, that's actually kind of like impoverishes today's youth because they don't have as many identity resources that are true, deep, and real, like, people in the past used to. Because it's like, if I want to like, express myself in a really meaningful way, this doesn't signal a lot, right? Like it doesn't signal much about me. So like we're losing our capacity to signal, this person was asserting.
So I came across, there's one of my favorite TikTok accounts, the etymology nerd. He was talking about the etymology of the word core and how it became associated with aesthetics. And he raised a really interesting point that basically one of the big reasons it came to be this way is because of advertising preferences that shaped social media algorithms, in that like we want to have clean buckets to target people with. And I wonder how much of this is just an unintended consequence of how basically the advertising model has shaped social media, which is how most youth get their information. And so it's kind of a really interesting point of like we in a through a few algorithmic choices potentially, I wonder if this was the outcome of that, like there's an extent there, but like it kind of makes me question that we unintendedly almost made this happen.
This is a gravity center. Some big names there on the right are in this anthology. It's a new book coming out called The Dark Forest Anthology of the Internet. And you may or may not be familiar with the concept of dark forests. I was not until I came across this, but dark forests are online gathering spaces that are non-indexed, non-optimized, and hidden from public view. We have the view as a company that this is the future. It's been implicit in our conversation so far. Dark forests will proliferate in the digital, and it just seemed to me like a very compelling set of essays on this topic for sure. I like the juxtaposition here. In one day, I read Derek Thompson's article that a lot of people are discussing right now about why Americans suddenly stopped hanging out. Then I'm watching television, and I see this ad by Jim Beam of people in the bar singing Sweet Caroline together, and that's all it is. And at the end, it just says, people are good for you. It's like, okay, major brands are responding to this crisis. And like, obviously Jim Beam has a stake in us hanging out. It's like, oh man, I'm sure sales maybe aren't great. Like, we got to get people hanging out again. And there was some strategist in there that was like reading things like this and saying, I think there's an opportunity here to talk about, like, let's bring people back together. So you could just sort of like, your brief is showing, like the strategy is showing. It was, that was pretty obvious in this one too.
Did you guys ever see that list of the insight cliches that made the rounds? One of them was like, people are lonelier, people are craving connection, but lonelier than ever. Like, this ticks that cliche box. And I think the other one was, we're more divided than we've ever been. It was a good list. We're guilty of some of those.
Yeah, they're always funny, those lists.
Speaking of loneliness, lots of investment going into startups that are trying to solve this issue. And, real money is going into these spaces. So Peoplehood received like $7.2 million. Former Tinder CEO raised $4.9 million to make Mino, an AI chatbot that helps people practice difficult conversations with each other. Belong Center, which is also featured in this article, also secured like a $750K. For me, what I find interesting is that, like, as more money gets put into these types of startups, like, are we going to see new ways of innovating on this connective type of experience? Like, how many ways can you get people in a room to like talk to each other and like connect with each other? I think that's what I'm like curious about. Like, where are they going to be putting all this money? Like, people could frame themselves as like an emotional gym, for example. So then what are sort of the other ways in which community groups like this are going to try to create defensibility around this idea of like building connection and community?
That's a really good point. Something, when we get into these decks, sometimes like I take a step back and I go back to the talk that Martin Carafa gave on old men at our Toxic Concept Bureau. And I think like, yeah, this is probably like, these are all real problems, but also they're the companies that are helping us find problems. Like, that's the whole Gen Z like need to find problems, or like scanning for problems. And like there's just so many industries around problems, like the negativity economy we were talking about in last time. I wonder how much of this might be that, because I mean, you can just admit like 90% of the solution might just be getting out there and meeting people, right? Instead of having to like train yourself in these mental gyms and all these things. Like, so I don't know. I'm not trying to like underplay the severity of the problem, but anxiety culture really comes through in a lot of these insights for me.
For sure. I think ultimately what this is a lot of these things are essentially giving you permission to sort of act. Because if you just thrust yourself into like a random situation, I'm sure your anxiety will take over and you have no idea what to do with yourself. But in spaces like this, you are like given the parameters and like, oh no, everybody in here is here for a very specific reason together. So you guys are going to like feel a little bit more comfortable around each other instead of like having to just strike up a random conversation. I can definitely see that for sure.
Yeah, totally. Like when I go to physical spaces where I don't know the social norms, or where they're not defined or not clear, that's when I'm like, what happens here? What do we do? Then that anxiety skyrockets for sure, versus like a defined task or like, goal. Yeah, it calms.
I think that's always going to be the challenge with trying to sort of commercially solve loneliness, is that like, we crave comfort, we pay for comfort. And what you're describing is, how big is the market for people paying for discomfort, because that's essentially what it is. And I just wonder if like the question, because there's two questions. One, can we solve this, which is a big cultural question. The two is, can we commercialize the solution of it, which is, it's kind of mutually exclusive a little bit, and so it kind of remains to be seen, because, you point out, Rebecca, that there's a lot of seed funding. Where are the second, obviously VC capital has changed recently in terms of just, interest rates, but like, where's the late stage funding? Where are the mature companies in that space? Like, that's what I kind of want to really see, because it feels like we've always been making pot shots at this problem. But I don't know if anyone's really come with a solution that's reached any level of maturity here.
Yeah, this one was a fun article about how what started as separate trends, when you sort of put them together, take a step back, have sort of created this new kind of nuclear family unit. So, like beyond the surface, each individual, so these phrases like daddy, mother, baby girl, and the 30-year-old teenage girl. Again, like all separate, like beyond the surface, they kind of represent something a little bit deeper and are sort of a reflection of where, again, we are as a culture in the context of like these different roles. So, like the term like daddy is a reflection of like our daddy issues, if you subscribe to Freudian logic. Mother is, mothering or being mother is someone who is good at everything except mommying, and it's sort of this subverting this idea of like what a mother is supposed to do. And, the opposite, like mother is basically the opposite of somebody who's like a mommy, who is just like all about like taking care of like children and things like that. The 30-year-old teenage girl is like sort of an escape from all the burdens and anxieties that come with, being a 20 to 30-year-old woman in our current society, with like Roe v. Wade, like economic insecurity. It's sort of like an escape. This I'm just a girl becomes like a sort of a security blanket in some way. Baby girl is like associated with like actors like Jacob Elordi, and it's sort of this weird and funny way of infantilizing grown men as opposed to like our culture that stereotypically likes to infantilize young women. And so they just kind of all combined to sort of create this like chaotic family unit. And the journalist in this article talked about how like they, that it's like pictured as like pure like ferality, and that it also kind of is like beautiful in its own way. Families can be kind of like chaotic and wild, but yeah, this was a fun read. I didn't like think about putting all those terms together.
All right, next up, we're stuck in the liminal space between AI heaven and AI hell. So the discourse is AI heaven. There's so much potential, so much promise, but it's not here yet. The reality can be AI hell, like what is actually on the ground like right now. And I chose the word liminal here very deliberately because it's an anthropology word that refers to like a space in which like there aren't rules, there aren't norms, a mysterious space, like a confusing space that you have to figure out how to navigate. And like that's exactly where we are right now with AI. And the brand opportunity is obviously to move us away from hell and closer to heaven. Yeah, this is great example. Chatbots that tell you that the company that they represent is the worst company in the world, and you should never get delivery from this company. And AI can do these wonderful things. I found this pretty amusing. The chatbot of Air Canada invented a refund policy in an interaction with a customer that was not real, and so then the company had to honor that. Like, these are things we don't want happening. For companies, this is AI hell. Interesting uses here of generative AI. Kids that were killed in shootings, they deep faked their voice and then called lawmakers and left them voicemails as these students. Another one, we saw the "He Gets Us" ad during the Super Bowl. It wasn't AI generated, but so many people thought that it was that a controversy ensued, and they, had to wait. No, this was real. This wasn't AI. A lot of people were upset about the use of AI in this context, and like we're losing our ability already to to know what is and isn't. Like even things that are real, we're now saying that's got to be AI. And George Carlin, his estate recently sued for a comedy special that was AI generated. So it's like we haven't figured this out. It's going to be great, but it's messy.
Yeah, I think this is something that's like really powerful in that like we are being forced to question our reality in a very meaningful way, because like fake news did it a little bit, but this is really doing it of like I don't know. Before it was I don't know if I could trust the headline. Now it's I don't know if I can trust my eyes and ears too. And like it is pretty insidious that like we are now at a point where we do have to question these things. If something is outrageous, like, and so I wonder, because on the one hand we're getting more sophisticated, but on the other hand, are we being left with a deep skepticism or cynicism? Again, like, we don't know yet, but that's one of the things that it's really important to track, because generationally you do this for a decade. What does that do to your outlook of the world? Like, how do you filter information differently where you immediately discount anything that is odd? Like I feel like that can be taken in many directions. So certainly something to watch, because we're collectively building an intuition here. And, the point of people being wrong is kind of like, well, how accurate is that intuition about what is real content?
This is from the Future Normal newsletter. They do a series of like what if questions to try to paint the future. What if AI could enhance patient clinician experience rather than replace it? There's a list of startups on the right that are working on that. And interestingly, this Google's Amy model not only gave better diagnoses than the doctor, but here's what's interesting. It was also perceived as being significantly more empathetic. So we're supposed to be great at soft skills, right? Like AI is supposed to enable like the, flowering of human soft skills, freeing us up to do all that. But it's like, in this test, it's like, well, this thing's more empathetic. It's like, I feel more seen and heard by this. And so it's like, there's an opportunity there for humans to really pass this. And connected to this same point, I just found this morning. If we look at MBA programs, like these are the skills that people think are going to be most critical. Look at what happened to STEM from 2016 to 2023, and look what happened to look at the ones at the top. Time management skills, ability to work effectively in team environments, ability to communicate effectively. It's like this Derek Thompson's joke I think is kind of funny. We were so close to elite MBA programs centering a bunch of emotional regulation classes, and AI takes over the hard stuff. So 2010s learn to code, 2020s learn to cope. It's like, yeah, I think so. Like, right. Like this is the emotionality is going to be our human defensibility. We've talked about that.
Yeah, again, this is one of those things that's like really, really tectonic. What is kind of crazy is that like if AI is legitimately better at empathy and relational stuff, like does the human get sent to the back office? I don't know, but I mean, in certain fields, like it does make you wonder. And I think that that's kind of a comment of like if the market now optimizes for that emotional interaction, then now this is a bit of a stretch, but does the employee experience become incredibly critical? Because it's hard to be empathetic when you're overworked. It's hard to be compassionate when you're being asked almost too much of you. And so I wonder if the second order impact here is that if the secret sauce of a good customer experience comes down to that human interaction more and more, and that's the differentiator, do we have to fix a lot of the ancillary problems to just make us nicer and kinder and happier? I don't know, but that would be a nice outcome.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wonder what the tipping point is, right? Like what do we need to fully trust an AI doctor, for instance, right? Like what information do I need to be presented with? Like, oh, cool. Instead of seeing a human, I'm cool that it's not a human. I'll put on my Vision Pro. I will interact with the doctor, and I'm fully invested. I fully believe, I fully trust this person as much as a human. I don't know what fills that gap. Like what kind of thing has to happen? And it's like different in every category and every situation. I don't think there's going to be one universal thing that gets us to start to trust AI in many different situations. There's going to be a trust gap that's unique, I think, in every occasion. And that's a huge brand opportunity. The brand that figures that out will win. Right. So it's like, I feel like that's like the most pressing brand problem is solving that trust gap in your relevant industry.
I wonder though if maybe that's not the right question. Maybe it is for other industries, but for medicine, I can imagine it's not about gaining enough trust of an AI. It's when you've just lost so much trust in doctors. Then I can imagine it'd be very easy to go and just give AI a try. We've seen so many people already do that when they can't figure out what their diagnoses are. And I don't know if there's a stat somewhere. Anecdotally, it seems like there are more and more mystery illnesses. And we already know that there's sexism and so much racial bias in medicine as well. I think there's probably a lot of people that don't need much nudging to start using an AI doctor.
I think you're right in that like we see it as deeply objective. I'm just combining the earlier slide about how our AI doctor can get poisoned. And then that's the thing we have to worry about. So it's a whole new world.
This one is Google's next AI is about to get trained by millions of Reddit posts. So they're partnering with Google to use sort of all this user-generated content on Reddit to train their AI models. And when I first saw this, I kind of immediately didn't have a great reaction to it. I feel like personally, I don't know, I guess Reddit has always felt like a very human place to get information in the sense that like it's not necessarily, like, you don't go there for scholarly expertise, if that makes sense. Like you go there because you want to just hear from other people who have gone through the same experiences as you. And, it's just, there's a very human to human interaction that happens there. You don't expect the same kind of experience from Google. I guess there's an argument to be said there that like everything you make on Google is user, I don't know, but something about it just feels a little bit off. And I'm not entirely sure what this means. Like Google, for example, being completely run by like Reddit user generated content. Like I feel like I would actually trust it less, strangely enough. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because there's that additional piece
I
of
don't think
Google
that's
being there.
It's a strange data set. I think there are some major subreddits that they should cut out before they start pulling data.
So
But yeah, it's not. I mean, I who knows what it's being trained on? The data. I mean, I don't know too much about this, but like, it's one thing to train it on the data. It's another thing to train it on like the kinds of reactions that certain things get, or the human behavior, or kinds of discussions that people want. Like the second order insights that it could pull could be quite interesting, but the rest of it is quite
I think
questionable. I still find subreddits where I'm like, wow, this is wild that like there's a community around like I just discovered the world of what is it called? The subreddits where the snark subreddits where they just snark on on one influencer like super hard. It's pretty nuts. And that the one that's famous right now, the FOMOI subreddit, where they basically just tear apart celebrities based on blind items, I believe is what it's about. Those are just like, I mean, isn't that like one of the 10 core sins gossip? It's just nuts, those things. I digress. Go ahead.
The way
Go
I
ahead,
look at
Alice.
it is that like this is going to give, because think about just the scale. This is one of the probably the highest quality human to human databases that you can have access to. It's different from YouTube where it's just one person talking typically, but like, so this is like, if you want to, what this is going to provide is incredible conversational effective proficiency. It's going to get really, really, really good at just having conversation. That's the way I look at it. If you think about in aggregate what all of this does, it just makes it great at human conversation. The substance of the points notwithstanding, I think it's just the capability of it to hold a normal sounding conversation is going to be remarkably, remarkably good in the next generation or two of AI. So that's the way I would look at it, that we've passed the Turing test pretty comfortably at this point. Like, I think that, with something like Reddit, like the new Turing test is, does it make a good romantic partner, in my opinion? Like, and that, like, is it convincing enough? And I think with that data set and just how good it's getting right now, it's getting there. I don't know if you cover this, but Gemini, Google's Gemini, its context window for its new model is like, I think it's like 1 million tokens, which is so big that you can put an entire movie into it and like ask it for different clips. So that the amount of data it can chew on now is pretty insane. So like, again, in terms of like what it's capable of, when we think about like human interaction, these kind of layers, like it's a lot. It's going to be so much that, I don't know. Maybe it really will be better at a doctor at diagnosis and, bedside manner and, all those other things. Like we have a real existential question of, is it just going to be better than us, period, at like empathy? Like maybe we're not all we're cracked up to be. Maybe the human bedside manner just isn't as good as it could be.
So this is included not for what's here, why United Airlines is airing 6 different regional Super Bowl ads, but it made me think that the era of mass brands personalizing regionally specific TV is upon us. Like, why would you not try to execute your campaign in as many different, like, relatable ways as you possibly can? It seems like, we've had this approach for so long where it's one market or one national market, one spot. Like, that's not going to happen anymore, for sure.
In this next section, we're going to talk about essentially like imagined boundaries we have in society. And so by that, I mean like unspoken rules we have and how people are kind of challenging them and really kind of pushing back and experimenting, with their identity through kind of pushing these imagined boundaries.
Once again, our desire to moralize anything in this category is very, very strong. So, with the rise of Ozempic, we're seeing brands like, called here Sugarless and Veracity come through with claiming that they're quote unquote like natural in a way to sort of differentiate themselves from just your regular Ozempic. And we obviously know that natural doesn't really mean anything, but it's fascinating to me that we still continue to use this language to sort of like create these sort of fictitious boundaries of like, this is therefore better for you than the other because it's quote unquote natural.
There, natural does mean something though, because the FDA has been trying to define natural for decades. And they opened the arguments up to comments from consumers. And there's this researcher, I forget his name, he has written great stuff about it. He's actually a religious scholar, and he found that if the one common thing, one of the signals you get from these thousands of comments that people are leaving for the FDA is that natural means that it came from God, that it's godly, that it's religiously pure. So when people say natural, you are absolutely right. They're trying to apply a moral story to this. Like, this is the morally pure way of losing weight versus the the unpure way of doing it medically through actual Ozempic.
This did make me lean in though, Rebecca. I saw you put this in here. I was like, ooh, what is veracity? I need to look that up. I was intrigued.
In typical spaces in which we often, associate like bars and meeting men, like men and women meeting together, men usually approach women, but in this case, it's the opposite. It's a workshop in which women and men, they teach women how to interact with men. So it's sort of this flipped around, sort of like roles reverse situation. And there isn't a statistic to necessarily prove this in this deck, but it also talked about how men actually sort of fear approaching women, just like in fears of just being rejected outright or like being called like a creep and things like that. And there's also this additional perception that like women don't think that there's any men out there, and this group is sort of trying to essentially prove, first of all, that there are plenty of men out there. You just have to like interact with them, and that's essentially like the whole idea of this. And it's just a interesting look at like where again we're at in terms of our culture when it comes to like men and women like meeting, and it, again, like we have to sort of, the fact that we also have to like create workshops to like learn sort of certain these certain skills is also something that I don't think we used to have to think about as much, especially now that we live in like where dating apps are so normalized.
This is maybe like an obvious insight, but maybe the real signal here is like, look, we're doing away with a lot of old rules and norms. So we're kind of messily figuring out what the new rules and norms are, and it's by way of workshops apparently in this space.
No, I think
Yeah, to your earlier point though, Jasmine, it's like, it's not all don't live in your shell of anxiety, get out there and just talk to someone. That's what this is doing.
I think one phenomenon that has been surprising for me is so VR chat, which is one of those, it's a VR chat room that's like one of the most popular. During the pandemic, people were getting married in VR chat. People were dating in VR chat. There was like a lot of romance happening in that virtual environment, which was kind of interesting. And I do wonder with headsets and like especially the Apple avatars that they're trying to make a thing, as those get a little bit better and a bit more realistic, and you can sit in a room and you can see someone's body language across from you. Like, I wonder if VR has a place in the modern take on dating, because like, from a safety point of view, from a convenience point of view, like there are a lot of pros. Obviously there are plenty of cons too, but I wonder if that becomes a modality that makes some sense in here. Like, is it Tinder for the Vision Pro or for the, Quest 3? Like, I don't know. Again, like that's something that I would pay attention to.
We surfaced this in our community Slack as well. I wanted to sort of talk about it here. Wellness, typically has been like female dominated, but as more and more men are getting into or, entering this like wellness sort of space, brands like Remedy Space are taking the spa experience and rebranding it as athletic recovery. And it's, it's just like, I just find the example that I used in our Slack channel was that it just reminds me of how G.I. Joes were basically rebranded dolls and by calling them action figures. But the essence of it is that they're a doll, but it's just another sort of, I guess it's a lesson in positioning as well, in terms of just trying to cater to your audience and positioning your thing for a specific demographic of people.
Is this just us, like, is this just capitalism culture? Like, I wonder if like the function of a spa, like productivity culture, because like where, the point of a spa can be to relax and to do nothing and to have a good time, or it could be to extend my lifespan by X number of, I wonder if like this is, because I can see this through the lens of like productivity culture really aggressively saying that there is a, there's a ROI for every minute in the spa, you gain an extra few minutes of life kind of thing, like at the extreme. And so it's just kind of, it's the antithesis of relaxing in a lot of ways. It's just,
You can describe it through capitalism, but I mean, not very far. Like, yes, anytime there's a new advent of something to be sold, yeah, capitalism. But there was a great article by an author named Jessica Gross in the Wall Street Journal, or no, New York Times, I don't remember, saying it was about I don't remember what it was called, but it was it was about Huberman husbands, and she was talking about how we don't remember this, but before Arnold Schwarzenegger, like when Muscle Beach was first created, like I think it was in Venice, right? And you had all those like muscle guys like flexing and stuff and working out on the beach. People were like appalled, and it got a ton of negative feedback because caring about your physique was seen as very effeminate that recently. And the only way that fitness could be kind of popularized among men was to just to find a way to overcome that story or that stigma of being effeminate. So that's when like science with a capital S came in, and that's when you got people like Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's when you got remember that juice? I'm older than everybody here, but like that guy that was selling juice on TV. That like really never mind. I grew up with that guy, and then like then you come to Huberman Husbands, where like it's just like this hard science stuff because we're really it has to counter that effeminate story of like real guys shouldn't care about the way they look. Real guys shouldn't care about relaxing. That's fluffy. That's girl stuff. So what you're talking about more here is I think like like a like social stories than it is capitalism.
I know that like one thing that was really surprising to me in listening to a lot of podcasts about like, you know, the efficacy of exercise, the science of exercise is that before, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger made weightlifting popular, it was so rare to have people exercise that it's really hard to get long-term longevity data on muscle and the effect of muscle mass on longevity because we just didn't do weightlifting before then. And so it was such a rare thing that like we kind of have this huge hole in our data of not knowing, like we know a bit more about like cardio exercise because that goes longer, but like we just don't have that much long-term data on weightlifting because it's such a recent phenomenon, which kind of blew my mind when I heard that. I think it fits your point a little bit, but you know, with a lot of these things, with exercise and with dating in the modern way of doing it, is like it's only 100 years old. Like it was scandalous in the early 1920s, and I think it's so easy to forget that.
Lest we forget, you bring
Well,
up
I
that
think it
stat
just
a
goes
lot.
to the point of like everything we think is timeless is so recent that like to expect it to not change, I think is to kind of ignore most of history.
There is new research coming out that 70% of teachers are reporting that they're witnessing a rise in sexist language in their classroom. And also, we talked about this last time that there's a stark ideological difference in like politics or like different issues between men and women, and that's increasing. And that was specifically, you know, between 18 to 29-year-olds. But this is potentially evidence suggesting that that trend might continue, and that there's also 1 in 5 men in the UK are they view Andrew Tate favorably, and Andrew Tate has kind of proclaimed himself the king of toxic masculinity. So it'll kind of be interesting to kind of track this divide we have going between, you know, genders and to see, you know, if that comes together. Maybe AI, you know, different things that happen might bring people together more. I'm not sure, but just something to keep an eye on.
One theory that comes to my mind immediately is gaming. You know, as youth is spending so much time in Twitch streams and like the history of toxic masculinity and gaming is long. You know, they've been knitted together really from the start. I worked on League of Legends. It was that was the brief, like clean up. How can we prevent this in our community? And you know, as you know, and gaming so violent as well. And as you know, kids spend a lot of their time in on Twitch. Like you know, you could see that kind of language coming into the real world pretty easily.
So everyone around the world probably heard that Wendy's was looking at testing surge pricing or dynamic pricing, as they also said, at restaurants next year. And they've kind of since backtracked only because there was a large outcry. So originally they talked about, you know, potentially during busier times, increasing prices, but then also on the flip side, which they didn't emphasize as much, decreasing prices during, you know, non-peak times. And I think it's just really a message, also like a lesson in messaging, because I don't think people realize like Amazon, airlines, or they have dynamic pricing. They've always had dynamic pricing for, you know, for quite a long time. which, can obviously benefit the consumer when it's lower, if people aren't buying things. But they kind of just like, I'm not sure why they just told the public this. They were just going to test it, I think, at some restaurants, but obviously like the public reacted very negatively. Even Burger King immediately that day released or the day after released in their app a free a free burger, basically saying like we're the anti, surge pricing. So I don't know, just a interesting thing to look at, especially since, maybe with AI, like we can have surge pricing and offer like, different specialty specials. If like you're a certain person that comes by and enjoys a certain thing, maybe you get a discount. So it can also work to the advantage of the consumer.
I think the greatest sin there is that it felt like off-brand, just random.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that was the odd part.
I saw a great meme of my parents at 30 buying a house, me at 30. Your $6.25 bid for a cheeseburger was rejected.
So with social connection hogging the spotlight, play and pleasure are unmet needs flying under the radar. In a lot of media, focus is on the problem of like loneliness. Like we even had a whole section about it, and the lack of social connection. But we don't talk enough about sort of the needs that are underneath that. So play and pleasure, these are things that allow for social connect to happen. And the signals that we will go through in this section we'll see how brands elevate just that.
So a Pew Research study just came out and it was examining TikTok use in adults. And they found that the top 25% of US adults on TikTok produce 98 of all publicly accessible videos. So people are basically just on TikTok. They're not posting videos. They're just kind of watching and observing. So even half of US adults on the site have never actually even posted a video themselves. They don't have a bio. They might not even have a picture of themselves. They're just kind of observing different TikTokers. So we are definitely going all in on, kind of concentrating where some of our entertainment is coming from.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder that if you apply, just, I know we keep going back to AI, but there's an interesting question here in terms of AI produced content, right? Because if you add leverage to this and you can 10x the amount of content you produce, like, does that skew even more to the few producing mass content for the many? Like, it feels that is the trajectory we're heading in that, like, I don't know what the limit is there or like how far that's going to go. But if this is the case, again, like just thinking about information ecology, the diversity of perspectives that you're actually consuming goes down significantly because it's so narrow. And so it just becomes a kind of an interesting question about like the internet and social media, they're public spaces. And so the loudest voices win. And so, it's a question about diversity of information. I kind of really wonder if that is trending downward significantly. Maybe it's not, and I hope it's not. And the counterfactual could be true that AI could help creators who aren't getting as much reach. But I think this is one of those pivotal questions of like, where does the leverage, like who does the leverage of AI generated content benefit most, is I think a very, very important, a culturally important question.
Everyone on dating apps wants banter, playful banter, but what does that even mean? The mentions of banter, or looking for banter in profiles, has gone up quite a bit. Obviously, I think it's the Love Islandification of America, and like we're watching so much UK reality TV, and like this isn't the only example of like I'm starting to see ads in British now deliberately, and I'm like, this has to be Love Island. That's what's to blame here. Like not in British, in English, but like British accented, and like this 100% is that. Like daters are watching Love Island. It's like the most popular reality show, and it's seeping into our culture. The new British invasion banter.
I want to bring back the notion of being chat-fished, of just like ChatGPT being used more and more in dating, because like this is hard. Like it's not easy, and like if it's if you're, especially because of the asymmetry of behavior, if you're a guy in a looking for a heteronormative relationship, like that can be quite a lot of work to be funny all the time. And so like I do think that like chat phishing, using ChatGPT for your banter, for your jokes, is going to become much more prevalent. I think we talked about this, offline, but about there's that one guy who used ChatGPT to speak to like hundreds of women and found his wife through that, and it's just kind of like it's a whole new world. But the question of like authentic banter, I guess, is legit.
Cuteness, is actually not childish or frivolous. It has very real world implications. And so this article is talking about how the idea of cuteness can actually like change behavior or, elevate feelings of empathy and things like that. Like Lovat, I'm assuming like a play on robot. It's like doe-eyed companion robot with a button nose and is covered in sensors to provide, it combats loneliness amongst elderly. And it's not just that it's this little companion doll, but it's the way it looks, like the big eyes, like the button nose, like creating this idea or sense of cuteness is what is attractive and what is combating this loneliness or providing companionship, like things like that. In Japan, like is kawaii, like the cuteness barriers are thought to reduce road rage incidents, which I had no idea about. And then putting images on sea turtles or dolphins trapped in rubbish has also been shown to reduce plastic waste. And for example, cute babies are, encourage people to have empathy for, demonized like groups such as refugees. And so cuteness has a lot of power, more than we think.
This is so funny because I can just imagine in hindsight, we look back and think, oh, the solution to climate change was just making the earth cuter. And then, that was the thing that was holding us back.
There was a study that I'll never forget, a crime-ridden neighborhood in London that was really, really rough. And so they painted images of babies on storefronts, and the crime rate dropped after the babies like started showing up on storefronts, because like presumably for the exact same reason that you're talking about here, Rebecca, that like, oh, maybe I won't, you see the baby and you rethink what you're about to do.
Is there a word for the aesthetic of like what? Because this is like an alternative future to cyberpunk where everything's just really freaking cute. Just suddenly in my head, I just downloaded a new aesthetic that I've never seen before.
Gen Z and millennials are rediscovering the public library, connected to the theme of pleasure at risk of sounding like I'm really, really high. The library is a very sensuous place. It smells, there's textures. It's like, it's a vibe. The library is a whole vibe. And I think like that's in large part, if I had to guess, what's fueling this return to the library. Maybe there's some like nostalgia happening as well, but good for libraries. We would have thought they were on their last leg.
Slow travel has been gaining a lot of speed with luxury trains, especially post shutdown, like pandemic. These trains are like super highly designed, like they're like champagne and butlers, like really, really expensive luxury like trains. And they're essentially really just built for leisure, enjoyment, and, literally just rather than just getting you from point A to point B, really just like elevating that experience of the journey while you get from point A to point B. Definitely would love to be on something like this. I've always like wanted to be on a train and then travel like along the coast on the west, here from LA to wherever on the west side, but still haven't done it yet. But that's another story.
I think there's a great one to Seattle. Like it's a really special one. So you should check that out because they have like special viewing cars with like windows that go like all the way up. Looks pretty cool.
I've shared a lot about this internally. And it's kind of a concept that's been trending in late 2021, early 2022, but essentially, many people are in their slut era, and it has nothing to do with sex or dating or anything like that, but it's kind of just a renegotiation of like pleasure and doing what you like and like what pleasure like what it means to have pleasure in your life. I like this tweet that said, "Slut era, I say as I stay up until midnight to watch Taylor Swift play bingo." So again, it's like nothing about dating. It's about like this other person said luxuriating pajamas, staring into the void, drinking seltzer in your pajamas, that kind of thing. So it's creeping into different categories, different brands. So how can you make your brand, I guess, a little more pleasurable? So McDonald's is opening up an anime version of their restaurant in LA, and they're also going to launch a new, I believe, nugget sauce during this pop-up restaurant. And we talked about this last time of anime being like a really popular, gathering, subject for Gen Z. Even in like the Super Bowl, if you notice, like during replays, there was even some anime, like animation. So they're really McDonald's is really kind of grabbing onto this. They've also worked with a popular anime studio, and they are releasing some short films, releasing manga. So yeah, just kind of bringing the anime world to life. And McDonald's in a lot of anime films is talked about as It's called WickDonald's. So they're kind of leaning into that and really running with it and using that phrasing to market this. They have a website, WickDonald's. So yeah. And that is the end of our presentation. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.